Presentation?
Yes.
So this is our presentation. I believe it won't take very long. We are talking about the shared international standards for community development practice. And I had shared the document earlier on. I hope we've had the opportunity to look at it. We have both and also an abridged version and the longer version of the document, which makes it a lot more easier for us now to be able to navigate through the standards document. Of course, it's not very long, but again, it captures on the succinct issues that we need to focus on as community development practitioners. I hope you are recording. The starting point in the standards, of course, there's a long history that brings us to the point where IACD came up with the idea of standardization and adopting standards for community development practice. When you take into account the long history of the discipline, something like 6 decades or so of the development of the discipline. But the coalescing of that is that with the sustainable development goals, there was also the convergence of the thinking that possibly we also need to repackage the discipline, because with the sustainable development goals coming in, there was also the discovery that there was a lot more that needed to be done to streamline the discipline and also to bring it into focus, because with the reduced investment by governments in community development, then there was a discovery that we needed to go back and to organize communities to address their concerns and also to look at the resources that they have to address the emerging concerns. And so as a discipline, there was still the issue of community development is composed of so many approaches and sub-disciplines, so to speak: community organizing, community health, community planning, adult education. And of course, they all have a myriad of approaches and methods and the theories that guide their practice. Then, of course, as a practice, there is also the emergence of the paid category of community development practitioners who are employed in the civil service, public service, and also by the non-governmental organizations. But alongside, there is also another large cadre of practitioners who, for lack of a better word, would be called community workers. And in some cases, you also have community activists, people trying to bring to light the issues that need to be addressed in communities, and also mobilizing communities for no pay on a voluntary basis to address the concerns of communities. And so to a large extent, all that brings to focus, whether paid or unpaid, or the different sub-disciplines, is the concerns of the communities that need to be addressed, and in a more organized and standardized manner, so that ultimately the dignity of the communities and also the dignity of the profession and the practice and the discipline is also protected. And so there is a coalescing of the need then to promote high standards of community development practice and the community development discipline, so that then the interests of the practitioners and the interests of the communities then can be protected, can be promoted. And so as part of that standardization, of course, led to IACD adopting the definition of community development in 2016 during the annual general meeting, where then there was giving of prominence of community development as a practice-based profession and also as an academic discipline, where again there is also a structured process of inducting new members into the discipline and giving them the knowledge and skills that they require to be able then to be practitioners who have the core values, the core skills that are required in the discipline. In 2016, again, IACD board adopted the definition of community development, where then we have all capturing all the key ingredients that go into the discipline. And I believe this far, you've already come across this development, which now becomes a flagship of IACD in terms of saying, this is what community development should be as a practice-based profession and also in an academic discipline that is promoting the core values that are important in community development and also in the communities that we work with, whether these are communities of locality, communities of identity, or even communities of interest. Again, whether they're in the urban areas or in the rural areas. As a practice, then community development needs to embody certain values, which of course are captured in the definition. And starting, of course, with the issue of rights. For a long time, of course, community development was about needs. And when you talk about needs, we are focusing more about problems. But then when you go to communities and you say their rights, then those are entitlements which have to be met, which have to be provided for, which has to be ensured and guaranteed, so that ultimately the dignities of the communities, whatever their station in life, they are protected and promoted. The issue of solidarity as a right is also important because, again, community development is a collective endeavor. Community outcomes are brought out based on communities working together in solidarity, appreciating that when a part of community is in need, then the rest of the community is also in need. And so there needs to be building of a solidarity in addressing and a commonness and social cohesion in addressing the issues that need to be addressed. And that becomes a core value of community development practice. The issue of democracy is also important, not in the political sense, but in the sense of ensuring that the voices of all people, all members of the community, old and young, the smallest and the biggest in terms of socioeconomic status, their voice counts. Those who have leadership positions, those who have no leadership positions in communities, their voice count in terms of trying now to bring and ensure a common agenda in terms of addressing the issues that are important to the community. The issue of equality is also an important value that is also needs to be taken care of in community development practice, where again, equality, where we are talking about an inclusive process, men and women, boys and girls, the rich and the poor are treated equally. But of course, as you talk about equality, there's also the issue of equity that also might need to be also, and the times also needs to be taken into account, so that then we can also have a affirmative attention to those who are disadvantaged. Then the issue of environmental and social justice is also an important consider value that we need to address as we do community development. And more so when you take into account the issues of sustainability. We can't talk about sustainable community development practice. We can't talk about sustainable development if we also don't ensure that what we are dealing with is environmentally just and also the social justice in the process. We're talking about climate change, but also it's talk about within social structures. We also need to build a society that is sustainable and social justice becomes in, so that then there is fair and equitable access to the resources that are important to bring about and to support community development. And these are values then that are important to us as community development practitioners. And so when we ultimately then we look at what we ought to do, then we need to look for the common and the higher purpose for community development, where then we are working with communities to attain all these values, so to speak, so that we can achieve a participatory democracy, sustainable development rights, and ultimately social justice. Just recapping and going back to the definition so that we have a sound understanding and foundation for what we do and what we ought to do in our everyday engagement with communities. During the 2016 annual general meeting, the Training and Professional Development Committee, in partnership with the Community Learning and Development Standards Council of Scotland, were tasked to come up with international standards for community development practice. And of course, after a whole process of consultation and engagement, then the product was what now was launched in 2018, during the World Community Development Conference in Ireland, Maynooth, which document was shared and is a document that has been sitting in our website for quite some time towards a shared international standards for community development practice, which now puts together and then encapsulate all these things that I've just indicated, but in a structured manner, and also giving an agenda in terms of then what we need to pursue to promote and to marshal all community practitioners towards a standardized practice and towards a standardized discipline. The standards are built around 8 themes, which start from the issue of values, which is very important, because if we have no values that underpin our practice, of course, then we may not go very far. Then there is also the focus in terms of how do we engage with communities, how do we ensure participatory planning, how do we organize for change in communities, how do we learn and build learning processes in the change processes, how do we make the discipline and the practice address issues of diversity and issues of inclusion, including ensuring that also we don't exclude other people in the course of trying to bring exclusion, because we can also bring about displacement. Then the issue of building leadership and infrastructure is the 7th theme. And then the issue of developing and improving policy and practice so that then we can institutionalize community development practice in a structured and standardized manner. So let me look at each in slightly more detail. And when you look at theme 1 in the standards, it's about it's about putting values into practice. And simply what then we are looking at under this theme is trying to look at what are the key values, what are the key processes, what are the key outcomes that are important for community development within our context, in the communities that we work in, and also within our roles as community development practitioners, because we want to understand what are the values within our communities, and also what are the values that we should carry forward and that should embody our practice as community development practitioners. And so we need to then to be able to build our discipline and build supportive systems in the practice which underpin the values and respect and promote positive and progressive values in our communities and also in our discipline. And this is the core that we're talking about then is under theme number 1 of putting values into our practice, which then we should work towards as practitioners and also with the communities that we work with. Theme number 2 is about engaging with communities, and it goes into again and packaging the whole process of understanding how communities that we work with, how they're organized and how we can engage with them in ways that then we can unlock the assets that exist in those communities, address the needs that they have, build on the informal networks that exist, address the myriad of interests that exist in those communities, and also look at how to motivate all the motivations that exist in the communities, both for the practitioners and also for the communities. Because again, the whole issue of communities get involved in community development practice has to be built up around some motivations that they have, some goals that they want to attain. There's also, as we get in communities, there's also the issue of understanding the power dynamics that exist in communities. Who is controlling what decisions, who is controlling what kind of resources, and to what ends. We also need to understand the opportunities that exist in communities so that then they become the starting points for engagement and for building of the projects and programs with our communities. And equally, we also need to understand the barriers to participation and barriers to exploiting the opportunities that exist in our communities. Also, as we engage with the communities, we also need to understand the issues that impact them, the issues that might be a drawback. What are the social dynamics that exist? What are the political forces that are in place? And equally the economic forces that exist in those communities, and also that impact on our discipline and our practice. as practitioners within our communities, because it's out of this then we can build relationships that enable us to work with the communities in a structured manner and in a standardized manner. And when we have all these, then we can understand where now to put the bar as we talk and as we engage with our communities. Theme number 3 is about participatory planning, where we need to understand, we need to develop and support collaborative working and participation with our communities. And increasingly participatory development is the norm, where we have community-driven development processes. But then we need to make this one a value. We need to build ideals around it, so that then we can find a way of building the capacities of the practitioners and the capacities of the communities, so that then we can be able to understand how to work in a structured manner, when we can also draw and break the barriers that stand in the way of participatory community development planning. And some of the issues, of course, will build around data. Some of them will also be around some of the processes that go into the participatory planning, including breaking the barriers that come with the top-down processes, where communities might not be equally be given enough space on the planning table. And these ideals, again, that we want to adopt and build in as standard practices for community development practitioners. Theme number 4 is about organizing for change. And again, we need to ask ourselves as the practitioners, how do we engage with the communities and then organize them in a way that then they can become partners and the co-creators for collective change. And so we need to enable communities to take part in collective action, and especially in a standardized and in a predictable manner, increase the level of influence, the sphere of influence, and in the decision making and in managing the change processes. And this has also to do with also the whole process of access to resources that exist in communities. So that as we organize, then we also organizing how the whole process of controlling and the managing resources takes place in the community, so that then there is a process where as practitioners we can deliver services to the communities in a way that is organized and in a way that ultimately is able to bring change and positive change in the communities that we are working with. Theme number 5 is about learning for change, where again, as practitioners, we need to build processes where we can learn from the change that we are bringing into the communities, and also the communities can also learn out of the changes that are taking place. And that means then we need to anchor our practice on the experiences that are coming in, the knowledge and skills that exist in the practice and all that exist also in the community. And we also need to develop learning opportunities and activities so that then we can be able to address the convergence of the needs of the communities and the learning needs of the practitioners, so that then every opportunity that we are working with the communities as we organize for change is also an opportunity where we are learning and we are addressing the needs in a progressive manner. In the process, then we have a discipline and we have a practice that learns, and based on what is coming and what is emerging, we draw lessons from the communities. And that's part of now the whole process where as we engage with the communities, we also engage with the communities as learners, in as much as we might have slightly more knowledge and skills in certain areas, but equally also get the communities also to learn, because that way we build then sustainability in our discipline and practice. Diversity and inclusion, I came up earlier as a value that we need to promote, and it's also part of the themes in the standards, where again, we need to recognize diversity and support inclusive practices for practitioners and also for communities, aware that as practitioners, we are not homogeneous. As I said earlier, there are 4 disciplines that are already in place supporting community development practice, and of course there might be a few more. Then communities are also not homogeneous, but then we need to work in a way that then we build all this diversity and to exploit the benefits and the advantages that come from the diversity, and also ensure that there is an inclusive process so that then we don't leave out people or leave out segments of the communities. Some of the practitioners are excluded from the practice. And all these then, we are talking about promoting standards that lead us towards bring on board everybody and working towards an inclusive community development practice. Theme number 7 is about leadership and infrastructure, where again, it's an imperative that we develop an empowering leadership within communities and build structures for self-organization at the community level. Equally, within the discipline, we also need to build structures for leadership, and that's part of what IACD is trying to do by still projecting itself as a premier institution that gives leadership in the discipline. And also that's part of also what we're also encouraging in the regions and in the countries, that again, we build leadership infrastructure so that we can be able to have a structured way of providing leadership in the discipline and also leadership within the communities. To a large extent, that's what we are trying to do with our network in this country, the Association for Community Development Practitioners in Kenya. So that way they can be able to a large extent, to professionalize the discipline and also to have structures where then we can be able to engage in a structured manner and provide leadership in the discipline. Theme number 8 is about developing and improving policy and the practice, because again, as part of mainstreaming community development practice in our region, in our countries, then we also need to engage with policymakers so that then what we do can be reflected in policy. What we do can also have ultimately some policy framework that guides it. And community development practice in many countries is still work in progress, but that's part of now what you're talking about. And so that then as we professionalize and institutionalize the community development practice, then you have some predictability and also you have some fallback position in terms of a legal and the policy framework and also an institutional mechanism that is in place. When it comes now to sourcing for resources, it becomes very easy when this is in place, because then you have a sound basis that exists, that's embedded in a legal and the policy framework. Our engagement as IACD with the UN as part of the accreditation is part of this. Is making policy and practice part of what we do, and also if in the countries setting up networks and also professionalizing and institutionalizing the practice, that's also part of it. So that then there's a reference point and in engaging with the established authorities. So as you look at the way forward, then we need to embrace, we need to domesticate and also promote the use of these shared standards. It's a document that is in place. It's a document that then we can work towards domesticating in our different regions, in our different countries. And as part of taking the process forward, there's a book that's already under development. International Community Development Practice is the title for now. That is being worked on based on the 8 themes. And of course, the target is to have the book launched during the conference in Nairobi, the World Community Development Conference 2021 in Nairobi in June. And already a draft manuscript is almost in place. We also talk about making the standards more accessible, and there has been the call by IACD to translate the document into the major languages of the communities of the world. And so far we have 11 versions or translations into 11 major languages: English, Kiswahili, French, Spanish, Malay. And then in the former Soviet space, we already have 6 translations: the Russian, Kazakh, Georgian, Ukraine, Belarus, and Armenian, and many more already under development. The Indian version is already, the Hindi is already under translation. And my challenge to you is that you can pick it up and translate it into a major language in your region, in your country, or the languages of your countries, if you speak, if it's possible, because that way then we also have a document that guides our operations in the countries that we operate in. You can access these documents in the link that I'm indicating in the website. This is the Kiswahili version that's already in place and was launched in June, in April last year. So that's my presentation. Thank you, Asanteni, and God bless you. I hope we are still there. So at this moment, I'll invite comments, any interjections and observations. Stella, we can hear you. Any comments, observations?
Dr. Muia, I just want to comment by saying, I think it's a good idea. I think it is correct in bringing some order in the house. I just published, or I'm in the process to publish an article on community development where we are sort of in search of this order in the house, and it's under review at the moment. And I think this takes us somewhere, and it needs to bring together and be distributed to all these, may I call it, local activists that have some other bee in their bonnet and pushing community development in certain directions. I think this type of document would assist in getting everybody on the same page if handled correctly, and the approach is neutral. That is the word I want to say.
Okay, thank you, Deshut. And we'll be glad to receive your publication when it's done. Just share it with us, make it available to us.
It should be, well, I had to work on the comments on it, but the theme the title is very provocative. It says community development has been hijacked. And the theme it has been hijacked by charity. And it evolves around that. So we need proper scientific theory. That is what it is all about. But I look forward to your comments if and when it's published. It will be very soon. I think before end of the month or so.
Okay, thank you very much. I hope it is still the one you are going to present in the conference in 2021.
That was the paper that was meant to be published, to be presented in the conference. So I published the paper in the meantime.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you very much. I appreciate. Any further observations, comments?
Yes, Daniel.
Yes, Catherine.
And I want to thank you for unpacking this very important document into such manageable and practical pieces that really make a lot of sense. Just listening in, I just realized how important it is also for us members to do the same, just like the word asks, do the same for the activists on the ground. And you've just made it so simple. I've never had it in that kind of a frame. So if there's a way that one of the trainings that we have every month, if there's a way that we can be trained on how to present the same to the people that we work with, to the activists on the ground, in such practical pieces that don't really sound like policy documents. It doesn't sound like the policy document you have at the board level. It sounds like it's just on the ground. Then this would make a lot of sense for us. And all what I see, I'd pick three words or three sentences. One is engage the communities. The other one is do no harm. The other one is learn, both ways. Thank you. And congrats, Daniel, again.
Okay, thank you, Catherine. Well, this is a, excuse me, this is a challenge that has been thrown to us. One of the things that that the standards stand for is that the neutral document, they are applicable in every context, and both in the developed world, in the developing world, and in privileged and less privileged communities, because they are standards of ideal, the ideal standards or statements of what should be, what ideally should happen with community development. And so as benchmarks, then they're applicable everywhere. Even in the most developed countries, they can still ask themselves, how far have they come with regard to some of these statements of value, statements of intent, statements of what ought to be achieved. And similarly, in the less developed countries, the same can also be asked in terms of how far are we with regard to the various positions as presented in the standards. What, of course, you're indicating is important. Still breaking it down further to the activists, to the communities, and our partners that we work with, so that then they can be able then to get it and to use it. Well, that's work in progress, and that's a challenge to us. In the Kenyan context, we are still planning to see how we can domesticate this document, and that means sitting together and picking it up and then putting it within the context of the Kenyan situation. Once the COVID situation, this is one of the things that we hope we'll be able to do. It was work that we should have done by now, but then the COVID thing came in, and then it's off the track. And so it's work that needs to be done. And of course, the challenge is for us, again, we can still pick, there's a lot more that can be said. And in our seminars, again, we can always pick it up and deal with each of the themes in more detail, rather now of looking at the global document of the eight themes. And that's a challenge that we can work on. So maybe after Obo presents on youth empowerment, we can come back to the standards, and then we can go through theme by theme and see how far we go. In the November webinar, we can go back to the standards, and then now go slowly through each one of them in more detail, and then see where are the opportunities for then bridging with the community level activists and also the community partners that we work with. And then we can use concepts that they use on a day-to-day basis. Thank you.
Okay, I think, Daniel, that's quite good and very clear. And I like the way you put it about COVID. The world and community development is changing with COVID, and we're going to have a totally, we kind of like having totally new ways of addressing issues as they come, as they arise, which is more of like putting off fires that have been created by the COVID situation. And it will be interesting to see how different regions for community development will move towards, using the same, anchoring whatever it is that we do on the values that we have on the standard document, and how sense that makes moving forward. And I think for Africa and for the whole world, if there's a time to really hold this document and unpack it and digest it and see what sense it makes on the ground, if there was a time to do that, it is now that we are in this kind of a situation where we don't even know where community development direction it is taking, and the shape that is being defined every day by some factors that are beyond our circumstances. Thank you again, Daniel, and thank you all.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much.
Hello? Hello?
Yeah?
It is Obo.
Yes, Obo, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks so much for the presentation. It was really good. why you were presenting in terms of standards, yeah, because I know that from different areas are different standards of community, but something struck my mind based on what you're presenting. You know, the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, you understand? They were able to put everything in a pictorial form. So when you click on it, you could know where you are, goal 1, the picture, goal 2, goal 3, goal 4. So in that picture form, anywhere you are in the world, you know, you kind of, you are able to follow the same, you know, you understand what it means. So if we can have something like that, even from the African context, you know, then we can all have that standardization based on the themes that you've mentioned and the pillars we have, so that every community can know what it is by just looking at it pictorially. So to me, that's my suggestion we can add to it in terms of having these things in pictures.
Okay, thank you very much.
May I come in here? Obo, I think you're right. I don't want to say that it is wrong, but it is now named standards. But what it actually is, it's principles, because there's no standard in it. It doesn't say what is a standard value. It doesn't say what is the standard for this or for that. It doesn't make that value decision on what the standard should be. I interpret it as being standard principles for community development practitioners. Because when I only hear the word standards, I expect some other level of evaluation for what's good and what's bad. And that violates the indigenous, local diversification, diverse environments in which development is done. But I would be much more comfortable in calling, but it's too late now, but calling the document a standard practice. Standard practices rather than standards which sort of provokes or begs for some other level, which is not the case. It's principles of approach anyway, but that's it. But it's good. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. When you look at the document is not standards. The document is towards standards, and that's what we're working on. So we are not saying this is it. It's work in progress. And so what we are saying, these are standards we are aspiring. These are aspirations. And so we are not saying this is the bar. We are saying these are standards we need to work towards in our endeavor in community development. And so that's why now we are saying this is work in progress. This is what we are trying to promote. If then there's enough buy-in, and then there's coalescing, then we can move to the other point, and then we say, in terms of then accreditation, then we have a bar. This is a minimum that needs to be obtained. But then this is a discussion that we are building. This is a discussion that is on the table, so that we work towards promoting international standards. And it's part of now why we are talking about then internationalizing community development practice, so that wherever place you are in, because again, we are working in communities. And if we are talking about community and dignity, dignity is the same, whichever region you are in, whichever race you are in, dignity is the same. And so if we are working with communities, then we need to be guided by some universal aspirations, which we are working towards. And of course, and that's why now it's a document that is marshalling us towards coming up with what is generally, commonly, and universally acceptable. Of course, we are saying we can domesticate and then, of course, contextualize the document, aware that, of course, there is diversity in our across different communities and regions.
Thanks for. I like that. I forgot, and you're absolutely correct there. I forgot the title is actually towards.
Yeah.
And that is true. Then yes, it should be treated as a living document. Yes, I like. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's a document where there is learning and is progressive. Obo, in terms of graphics, I was trying to look for my hard copy quickly. Maybe if you go inside the document, there is where we have the circular graphic about the standards. So inside the document, there is some graphic about where we have linked the standards just the way the SDGs are linked. Maybe that's something I would have shown. Maybe if you can come across that page, you can flash it. I don't know if it will be possible, but it's already there in terms of graphics, where you can actually pin it on the wall and say these are the standards graphically, just the way the SDGs are indicated. In terms of progression, Obo, when you talk about standards, when you talk about values, there is none that is superior than the other, just like human rights. Human rights, there is none which is superior than the other. And the rights are also interlinked. And so, and therefore then equally the values, in terms of we are presenting them as a theme number 1, 2, 3, 4, they all stand at the same level. Because if you remove one, then of course you threaten the dignity of the practice. You threaten also the dignity of the communities that you work with, and also the dignity of the practitioners that you work with. Because for instance, if we are not driven by values in terms of what we do as practitioners, then of course all that we do with the communities comes to nothing. Earlier on, before everybody came on board, we were discussing with Meredith and Deshut, and we were talking about integrity issues when we are responding to COVID. Those are value issues. Because if the practitioners cannot respect the resources that are made available, then the communities, of course, come out the worse off. And then, of course, the converse is true. When eventually we are all put in the yellow or pink or whatever color of the uniform of the people in the correctional institutions wear, then, of course, the communities come off the worse off, because the people who are supposed to facilitate and work with them, they have been taken out of the system, largely because they do not respect the values of their practice.
Daniel, I can share my screen just to show everybody that graphic really quick.
Yeah, sure, thank you.
Okay, so can everybody see this all right? So this is just within the standards, so you can kind of see how everything is linked here. And I saw that Elizabeth had asked in the chat about kind of a simplified version. So we also have a summary guide of the standards too. And this really gives you a really simple form. There's like a whole chart here, and it really shows you how things are linked. And this is just a really, really short document. But if you do go back to the full document, you'll see a few graphics like this in here. And again, that same kind of table that just breaks it down into a really convenient way to see everything at once. And then it, of course, just goes really in depth into each standard, just like Daniel did with his presentation there.
Thank you, Meredith. You made it easy for me. So, that's where we are with the graphics. Just the way the UN has their graphics, this is the graphics for IACD, and so you can have the standards just in a poster, just or even as a bunch. Maybe we can encourage Meredith to produce a bunch where we can post on our breast.
No problem.
That's a discussion for Meredith and Catherine in the where we can have okay, and of course what also comes through is the issue of for Elizabeth, the summary guide, which has just been shown by Meredith. We have our Kiswahili summary guide already in place, just a 4-page document. If you remove the pictures, of course, you end up with something like 2 pages or less of text. And so we're also encouraging our colleagues also to come up with summary, translations of the summary guide to make it easier. The presentation I've made, there's also a similar presentation that's available on the website, which was made by our president in Georgia during one of the presentations she was making in promoting standards in working with the disadvantaged communities in inclusive practices in Georgia. And this one, Meredith, will also make it available on the website, so for ease of access.
Yes.
The presentation also was recorded, so it will also be available for use or reference going forward. Any other observations or comments?
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are. Thanks, Doctor, for the presentation about the summary, or basically the main themes in the standards. Maybe as we think about maybe those themes and then try to apply them in our different communities, maybe in the recent past, maybe from maybe January, that's around maybe 9 months or 8 months, our different communities have changed due to COVID. So even as we think about all these themes, basically, how can you be able now to change or work with the community from where it is right now? Because you are trying to come up, or you have tried to change the communities or work with the communities under normal circumstance where there was no COVID. But now COVID has come in, everything has changed. So that even what we thought was community development, it was overshadowed by different charity organizations that came in, people coming in and helping the different communities. So as you go in as practitioners, basically, how do you find your footing? So that as a practitioner, maybe you're working with the government or an NGO or a civil society, maybe you didn't have funds. And then different organizations came in, did all the funding, did all the charities. So as you go back as a practitioner, for instance, and you are not able to help the community at that particular point in time, how do you try to work again with that community? How do you try to, again, start planning with that community, start to engage that community, whereby basically you're going to have maybe different rejections because they didn't see you during the pandemic, now you're coming back. So how do you deal with that, for instance, and be able to work within the standards? So that even as we talk about planning for change within communities, basically, how are you going to go forward and do the different plannings or the different projects, the different changes that you want to see in these communities? How are you going to move forward after all this is done? And then the aspect of leadership. Different leadership structures have been affected, either religious, social, political. So how do we make sure that even as we are going to work in with the new leaderships or develop new leaderships within the communities, how do we still maintain all these different teams and try to link, so that even as we change the leadership, is it going to work with us within the different engagements within communities? Is it going to be able to work with us within our different planning exercises? So that even as we talk about one theme, basically, how can we be able to link it to all these other different themes? So that even as we do one project, you're able to work with all the different themes and be able to see how can they be able to work within that particular community. I think that's what I can say. It's something that you can think about and try to see, even as you're going to go back to the communities, how can we be able now to put these standards or be able to use these standards to help us move with the communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Stella. And I suppose that is a comment that had been made by Catherine about realizing that our communities have shifted, our communities have moved because of COVID, and equally the structures might also have shifted. But what is important is that, still as I indicated, the standards still remain neutral, still remain timeless. And so it's us now to see, with the changing situation, how do we still come close to where the standards are, or what the aspirations of the standards are. And so this is what, again, we need now to be sensitive to, even as we disseminate and domesticate our standards, so that then we can still, as much as things are shifting because of COVID and whatever other also issues that are coming in, including climate change and the extreme events that are taking place in our communities, then we still remain faithful to these aspirations of the discipline and of the practice, so that then we don't then start doing work which ultimately is not or cannot be said to be community development practice, or we work the communities in ways that then what we are producing cannot be, again, lead to them living lives or attaining lives that are dignified. And so this is a challenge to us to, again, have the document as the reference point and have the aspirations as presented as reference points in the spaces that we work and in the communities that we are working with. Or even in the student, there's where we have students, as we prepare them also to go and work alongside teaching them the ethics. This is also a package that they need also to be sensitized to. Thank you very much. Any other observations, comments? So I think with there being no further observations, then we can come to a close. And we have the next presentation coming in. Again, the second Wednesday of October. I'm sorry, the second Wednesday of October. A presentation by Obo on gender empowerment. And then after that, we'll come up with the subsequent one. In the meantime, those who have any comments, and before we lock them out, they could make some comments. And then we can also get out of the shadows for a